Welcome to the biannual NASCAR Screwed Up the End of a Plate Race video. But you're not going to hear a bunch of ranting and raving from me in this video. You're going to hear a lot of it on YouTube, believe me. There are a lot of people upset, with good reason, about what took place at the end of the race at Talladega today. But to me, ultimately, I realize that NASCAR is not going to change anything. They may change a few things. But if you're thinking there are going to be significant changes, if you think the yellow line rule is going away anytime soon, I've got a bridge to sell you. Because what NASCAR gets out of these kinds of races is a butt-ton of publicity. In the past, we would have called it ink. I think now we need to call it pixels. They get a lot of pixels. They get a lot of discussion out of these kinds of races. Yes, they are absolutely borderline completely illegitimate races. They are farces. I have established this 100,000 different times. And don't worry, I'm going to talk about each of the things that went wrong here and how silly it all is. Ultimately, these kind of races are pure entertainment. And entertainment in this sense is kind of a wrestling term, and that wrestling term is generating heat. That's what these restrictor plate races do. They get everybody way close together. There's humongous accidents. There is controversial finishes. There's rules that create controversial finishes. And we had kind of the perfect storm of all of those things coming together here at Talladega. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about what happened, what went wrong. But ultimately, remember, the thesis statement of this video, guys, is you should always expect this at restrictor plate tracks, or I guess super speedway tracks. I guess we can't really use the plate race moniker anymore, but I'm going to still use it because I'm a boomer. And what set really everybody off was what began as a race with a record 13 cautions, caused NBC Sports to cut the feed pretty much without warning early and send it over from the network TV channel to NBC Sports Network, where fans were treated to one of the most controversial finishes in NASCAR history, with no less than 4 separate incidents of cars going under the yellow line, the double yellow line, which is out of bounds if you've been watching NASCAR for the last 23 years. But Denny Hamlin, winning the race, passing cars underneath the yellow line, doesn't get a penalty. The second place, or at least second place on-track driver, Matt DiBenedetto, did for forcing a driver below the yellow line. And yeah, in terms of controversy, and I've talked about a lot of controversial NASCAR finishes, I don't want to necessarily say this is number one at this time, because certainly it probably would have been if Hamlin had lost the win. And believe it or not, I think that would have been more controversial. If there's one thing that NASCAR fans really hate more than anything else in the world, including the double yellow line rule, is when the driver who crosses the finish line first doesn't win the race. That being said, this was one of the more controversial, complete crap shows I've ever seen. Start to finish, really. I mean, I kind of make the joke every time I see a plate race. I'm like, oh, it's the 24 hours of Daytona again. But yeah, this was like the 24 hours of Talladega. Ironically, the official race time was only about 4 hours, about even. Felt like a lot longer than that. 13 cautions, I think 3 red flags. Whew, boy, it's tough to watch these races, I have to say. I mean, they are... And there's still some of that old plate racing magic from back in the day in NASCAR. I don't want to pretend like I didn't enjoy parts of this race. I know I'll be painted that way, but the reason we tune into these races is because they are entertaining, right? So from that perspective, yes, I was entertained. Was it 4 hours worth of entertainment? Probably not. But ultimately, that's where you came into what was the first controversy. Well, I guess the cautions are the first controversy, and ultimately that's just again, I've talked about plate racing before. I've said it has to change. It's never going to change. It's always going to be this, again, for the reasons I've stated before. This generates too much activity, too many tweets, too many YouTube videos. Would I have made a YouTube video about this race if somebody had won by 30 seconds? No. So that's exactly what NASCAR wants, okay? So that's never going to change, unfortunately. I've kind of realized that now. Here's what you can change, is the start time of the race. Because NASCAR has tried to wipe their hands of this and said, look, the TV partners ask for a later start time. They dictate this. It's not our choice. They want to do this because they think it gets them higher TV ratings. Well, we found out from the later starting Indy 500 this year that that's definitely not the case, by the way. But what we had here was NBC demanding that a race, and it really wasn't that late of a start either. I think it started green flag around 2 p.m. But as we know, these races are about 4 hours long. You almost have to budget in that time that there's going to be 3 or 4 crashes at the end of the race. Some of them are definitely going to cause red flags. And with the rules that NASCAR has, with the overtimes, with the red flags, by the way, again, great Indy 500 talking point there. Imagine what would have happened if the Indy 500 tried to red flag for a green flag finish. They would have kicked the end of the biggest race in the world to NBC Sports Network. That's exactly what happened here with NASCAR at Talladega. And don't pretend like anything different would have happened. NBC values the evening news more than they do sports, okay? That's just how it is. That is the rules of being on NBC. This is not necessarily NASCAR's fault. It is, I guess, for allowing the TV companies to ramrod them as hard as they have in their contracts and have this much power. In fact, believe it or not, the stage racing was a suggestion, I think, or a demand of the Fox and NBC's networks to try to get more advertisements shoved into the race. By the way, stage racing never produced any less advertisements. In fact, I think it produced more. But this is something you can hammer on NBC, and I think you might be able to change. Start times. NASCAR fans, you've got to galvanize here. You've got to start making a lot of noise about the start times. Because now you've seen the end result that I've been preaching eventually going to happen at some point with a damn late start race. If these NASCAR races, and they tend to go long, especially on these plate tracks where everybody gets excited and wants to see what happens, they always go long. You have got to, and I'm so sorry for the NBC Sports PR people because they're going to have to see and hear all this for a couple of weeks, but I think they need to hear it. I think you guys need to make some noise. Late start time or early start times, for the love of God, the late start times have to stop because you have now seen the end result. You've now seen the end result. And again, I'll ask the question again. Overtime. Was the finish today worth what was destroyed on track and the controversy and not getting that finish on NBC? Was the overtime worth it? I don't know. Let me know down in the comments. It's up to you guys what you think about that. Because ultimately, our finish was extremely controversial. And this is why. So the yellow line rule was what really caused all of this confusion. It was instituted in 2001, and it's been a part of the NASCAR series since then. You had 4 separate calls here that were made by NASCAR. The first one is a penalty on Matt DiBenedetto for shoving William Byron below the yellow line. Then there was a call on Chase Elliott for going and passing below the yellow line. That call was later rescinded and reversed and given to Chris Buescher, who was the one who forced Chase Elliott below that line. But the thing that everybody is talking about, well, most people are talking about, is the no call on Denny Hamlin, as it appeared he was forced below the yellow line by Chris Buescher. Cars were spinning almost spinning all over the place. Hamlin was all the way on the apron in the turn, made the pass, and went on to take the win. And ironically enough, NASCAR, there's a tweet out there, I hope I'll remember to put it in the video, said something to the effect of, it would be chaos if we got rid of the yellow line rule. As opposed to this? I mean, it's just, this is, again, I don't even need to get worked up about it. I'm really not worked up about it. I just think it's funny at this point. It's just like, nothing's going to change. They're not going to change this rule. They're going to stick with this. They're going to stick to this till the last dog dies. Because ultimately, it gives them the opportunity, and look, man, they're a private organization. They're allowed to do this. It gives them the opportunity to make determinations, manipulate results, if you will. Ultimately, they gave a penalty to Chase Elliott, a chase car, rescinded said penalty, even if it was justified. Why did you give the penalty in the first place? The judgment calls, the just the fact that some drivers seem to be able to get away with this and others don't, even if that's, that's only the perception. And I want to give NASCAR as much of the benefit of the doubt here as possible. Look, man, the officials can only rule based on the rules as they are written. And if the rules are written badly, probably not even by the officials that are currently sitting, it's hard to criticize that quite as hard, at least on the officials who are trying to make sense of some crazy rules. I do think they have to change the rule. Either they get rid of it entirely, which personally I would like to see, because ultimately, and I'm going to throw this out there, and I know that Dale Earnhardt got killed on this weekend. So totally understand why some people are going to hate this comparison. But if you look at some of the racing from the 2001 Daytona Speed Weeks, particularly in the dual races, where at one point there's 5 cars going into turn 1, all side by side, and they don't wreck. But it's a really exciting moment. I mean, Jeff Gordon made a couple of passes to win the Daytona 500, going under the yellow line and almost clipping the grass. So there were some extremely exciting moments that the yellow line rule took away. And certainly you heard Carl Edwards way back in the day, almost 10 years ago, or over 10 years ago now, talk about how NASCAR puts everybody in a box. A lot of these crashes happen because, well, frankly, people use that yellow line essentially as a wall, and it becomes a crash because they are not getting off of that yellow line, or they're not going to let anybody get it underneath them under that yellow line. They get turned. That being said, there is something to be said about Talladega having a ginormous paved back straightaway. If you get rid of the yellow line rule, well, where is out of bounds at that point? Because pretty much with these cars, as much grip and as much downforce as they have now, with the big-ass spoilers, Dale Jr. would say, they could probably run way down there. I mean, Denny Hamlin in a Gen 4 car making the move he made today probably would have spun out and crashed. But with the cars they're running, the aero monsters that they are, he was able to save it, and no doubt about it. To me, it was an awesome move, and if you looked at how much passing there was in that absolute mad scramble there at the end of the race, why wouldn't NASCAR want to encourage that at the end of the races? But again, it's all about the judgment calls. It's about the control. Totally get that. And again, for that reason, I don't think it is going to change anytime soon. But we'll have to see. I don't know. Let me know down in the comments anything you guys think about this. Again, it's hard for me to say that like Denny Hamlin shouldn't have won this race too. That's the other thing that's like, well, yes, but is he supposed to lift there? I don't think so. Anyway, subscribe for more racing content. I'm sure this will be a controversial video, but these always are. It's always fun to discuss, even if you disagree with me. We'll see you in the next video, and subscribe for more.